Hello everybody and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Westworld Season 2 Episode 3, Virtu e Fortuna. That's a little Italian speak for y'all, taken directly from Machiavelli's The Prince, and Virtu refers to virtue and Fortuna refers to fortune. Not exactly like the most difficult to decode words out there. And we'll get into the meaning of the title here in a little bit, but let's start things right off with the opener of the episode. Another cold open, by the way, the second one this season out of 3 episodes. And we start off outside the park that we know, but inside one of the other parks. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time we've gotten a look inside one of these other experiences. And it was not one I was expecting. Of all the sort of fantasy realms that I could imagine you could create with animatronic people and animals, India World was not like my first instinct. We got in here and I legitimately questioned, wait, is there really a demand for this? Like Westworld, I get. Westworld, you know, the West, right? Like that's sort of a huge, iconic, we still tell stories about that to this day, and there's still sort of that towering mythos of men and beasts and the legends and all this other stuff, and maybe it's a British thing, but I've heard a few British people talk about sort of the whole India excursion, and they seem pretty embarrassed about it these days. So I don't know how realistic it is, but I did, once we got into it, I can see the appeal. I mean, hunting tigers on elephants and like the whole safari gig, that seems pretty cool. If you can sort of get around the servile brown people thing that they're doing. And we kick things off with these 2 people that meet up. And the other really interesting thing here is that this is a romantic interaction between 2 full human type people, as far as we know anyway. It seems very, very likely that these are 2 full humans. And that's something that hasn't really been explored so far in the show. The whole wish fulfillment aspect of the various worlds was that you either didn't have a girlfriend and you went in to, you know, meet up with one of these robot ladies or mans, as the case may be, or you were getting away from the person that you knew. Actual human-on-human interaction is something they haven't touched on, and I think it's an interesting problem for just the in-fiction balance of having a Westworld around, because you can't have too many other humans in the world, or else you run into a lot of people that you can't kill with your weird Westworld computer gun, however that works. So you need to be able to sort of keep up the fantasy, there needs to be a relatively high ratio of host to guest. And yet here, these 2 guests meet up. They have a cool little test to make it so that the woman can be sure that the guy that she's about to get down on is actually a human. And they go out and they're sort of adventuring out to hunt tigers. At least that's what he's doing. Now, I thought this was very interesting. This woman at the very beginning here, I have no clue who she is, but she has a notebook. And inside the notebook, she has a drawing of the park with some very sort of geographic kinds of shapes on the page. It's only on screen for like half a second, but she has this weird interlocked hexagon symbol that I noted that she's apparently headed to. She's very cagey about not cagey exactly, but the guy comes up to her and she says, "I'm killing time and other things," and he assumes tiger, and she just kind of like rolls with that. But it seems like maybe she's looking for something else. Maybe she's on a similar quest to the man in black. She doesn't get super far, though. I mean, she gets off to, super close to the edge. The fact that when everything goes down, she essentially runs like a few hundred feet and is at the barrier of the park was another thing that I kind of felt like was a little bit world breaking here. If I'm building these narratives, I don't put people right up against the edge where they can't go back and they have a computer voice telling them, please stop, please return to the park, because that's not going to be a fun time for 99% of the time. But I understand you didn't want to have to follow her for like miles and miles and miles and the tiger hunting her. So I guess narrative convenience, she's right there at the edge. The uprising happens. Her boyfriend, or whatever you want to call him, is killed by one of the robots, and she gets chased by our tiger friend, who we've seen dead now in the future. Speaking of the future, or the present, or however you want to say this, the sort of the farthest along timeline that we're aware of anyway, Bernard and the Delos gang get into the sort of underground bunker where the boss lady is, and they're still looking for Peter Abernathy. She's looking for him. They're looking for him. They haven't found him. And in the midst of them saying, hey, we're still looking for him, we get a flashback to when they were also looking for them with Bernard. It was just him and the boss lady. And this threw me for a loop, because the arc that they take in the episode is they're looking for them. The Delos forces then are helping them get him, and then they have him, but then in the farthest future that we've seen, they don't have him, and it just I was running through a bunch of possibilities, and eventually I went and found somebody who broke it down on the subreddit. They're like, well, obviously they lose him again, which makes sense now that I think about it, but it just threw me all for a haywire loop, trying to figure out where Bernard was at what point on the timeline. Well, that's the basic overview. We'll get into it in specifics here as we go. But we get to them finding Peter, all right, Peter Abernathy. There is a character in the show named Abernathy, by the way, and it's not Bernard's actual human dad person. Sorry about that last week. The stupid off-script Albert just completely forgot his name. But here's the real Abernathy. He's been programmed in the park. He's wandering around. He gets sort of taken by these Union soldiers. There's a great fun bit where they reprogram one of these guys to be virtuous and kind, and he's like, it's so against type for the actor. And at the end of the scene where he's just yelling, allow me to assist you, ma'am, and she's like, get away from me. Such great stuff. But they find Peter, and they almost have him when he decides to go off script and kind of be all chivalrous and stand up against the Confederados, who then take him, and they have to go chasing after him again. Peter's kind of like a football in this narrative, it seems like to me. It's like, we got him, we don't got him, we got him, we don't got him, we got him. Are we looking for him? Fumble! Somebody lost to Peter. Go look for Peter. They're chasing Peter all over the place. And where we get to, he's eventually going to end up at this Confederado fort, which is where Dolores is. And Dolores is continuing her trek, continuing her wheeling and dealing through the world of this, the hierarchy, let's say, of these armies. And she's meeting the next guy up in the chain, who she uses the lower guy in the chain that she got last episode to convince, hey, I'm on the level, I know what's going on, here's these sweet guns, they shoot real fast, don't they? Yeah, you can have those as long as you help me out. And so they team up. And as they're teaming up, she sees that Peter's there, and he's sort of, losing himself. He's not able to put his words together correctly. And she's very concerned with him. She's concerned enough to try to pull him aside, to get him in a bed. Bernard's there at this point as one of the prisoners as well, and she knows who he is and what he can do, so she pulls him and says, hey, help him. And this is where things started to go a little bit in a different direction than I was expecting. We've seen Dolores, and we will see Dolores throughout this episode, be very cold-hearted and calculating towards the other hosts. And my assumption up until now was that she was just she essentially had ascended, in her mind anyway, to the next level, and anybody who was not on that level with her might as well just be garbage. And yet here she is with her dad, quote unquote, right? The original Peter Abernathy character that she was used to, the bot who played him, going off script, and she's invested in saving him, even though he's not only is he not like a fully ascended being like she is, he's less than he used to be. He's just a shell of programming surrounding this giant data dump that Delos is trying to get rid of. And yet Dolores here is reverting to some kind of primal, like, it's like she's trying to keep all of her old familiar stuff around her as she's ostensibly breaking free of that mold. It's a weird juxtaposition, and she has a similar thing with Teddy too, where she says to him, and again, I saw him as more of a tool to her now, but she has a genuine moment of, sort of connection with him, where she says, "You're all I have left now," to Teddy. And the fact that she's willing to go on these rampages and kill off so many other hosts as if they didn't matter to her, because I guess she thinks they're machines, and yet she's still trying to keep the ones that she loves alive. Well, I guess it's very human, right? If we're if we're going down the rabbit hole of there's just no difference here between how, these robots treat the world and we do. Obviously, we value our family more than we value other people, just because they're the people that we're around the most and we have the most emotional connection with them. Speaking of someone with emotional connection, Maeve is still on the hunt, and she encounters this tribe of Indians, and she is not able to control them. She tries to tell them to leave the human guy alone. They're trying to take him away, and she's like, "Nah, I need him. Be cool." And they don't. They don't be cool. And this is something I did not pick up on this on my own, but the theory going around on the forums is that these Indians have actually been programmed to help the humans as much as possible. So what is happening here is they're actually detecting, okay, the writer guy whose name I've forgotten here, he's a real human person, like we, number one priority, get him to safety, take him away from the robots, and they're not up to being reprogrammed by Maeve. Now she does manage to get away, she brute forces, runs away, shooting at them and stuff, but tying in with the end of the episode where our lady from the beginning of the episode is washed up and gets captured by the Indians, it seems likely that what these things are doing is actually acting as sort of a protective force for the humans that they can find. Where was I at? Maeve has more sort of banter back and forth about sort of programming versus free will, where the writer, sees Maeve and her boyfriend holding hands, and his reaction to this is kind of hilarious. He acts like this is just an affront to, like, this cannot be. You are not programmed to do this. And he goes off the handle, but then he sort of comes back with the, "Oh yeah, well, just you said a thing that I wrote, so are you really that free?" And it struck me, they go into this digression about how he has written this Isabella character into the narrative of the park, and that she was someone who he loved and that left him, and so he, in his revenge, wrote her into the narrative and then had her killed off. And this isn't, I don't think, really the point necessarily of this scene, but it just made me think of, we've been talking about the writer as God, right? The idea that there is a force, an all-knowing, all-powerful force in this narrative, at least up to a certain point, right? Back until the robots broke free, there was there was this controlling force, and yet it's kind of a pathetic God. Just in general, the idea of creating of putting people that you know into this story so that you can manipulate them and have your petty revenge is really pretty weak, I think. Maybe I'm overextending here, but I think like this guy, if this is your revenge to sort of anonymously include your girlfriend's name in a narrative where she dies off so you can say, yeah, well, I got the last laugh. Come on, dude. So it's this great meeting of sort of like the power of the pen and sort of the immense creative power that the author has, and you can sort of really puff that up and then sort of just put a pin in that and say, yeah, but they're using it for stupid stuff sometimes. I loved that moment of letting the air out of the writer, and I'm sure somebody had to write that, so that was a lot of fun for me. Dolores goes to Bernard. She has him try to fix her dad. And again, as I mentioned, this seems kind of like a weirdly futile gesture if we're talking about actual utilitarian use of this guy. But in the process, Bernard finds these files. And as this attack is beginning to happen, right, he's trying to decrypt these files, and eventually he does. He eventually breaks in and figures out what's going on. We still don't have a clue, right? Like he just like is all shocked and taken aback, and then we cut to other stuff and we don't get exactly what's happening. This is another theory that's not mine, but I think it's real good. Bernard starts glitching out after this, and there's a very strong possibility that he's transferred at least some of these files into himself and has taken them out of Peter Abernathy, which would be a great twist if it's true, that they're sort of playing this plot football with Peter Abernathy, looking for these important files, and in fact they're inside Bernard the whole time. I would enjoy that. But the invasion is kind of a ruse. Dolores has set up these, big reservoirs of nitroglycerin. She has these tactics set up for the Confederados to follow, and they're on board with it up to a point. I saw a lot of criticism in the forum also for the way that Delos attacked. It's just sort of all lined up in a row and charging across a field, which has not worked since Napoleon, really. But let's maybe... the defense on the threads, and I think that this is probably my defense as well, is maybe these guys just sort of aren't that good. Like, they're a private security force. They're ascended mall cops, essentially. Maybe they don't know a lot of tactics, and maybe they weren't really planning on applying whatever tactics they did know to just a bunch of robots. I mean, even though they know these things are potentially dangerous, I think they were expecting to be able to just sort of run in and mow them down, and the fact that these guys are shooting back and taking cover and having a pretty good setup. This is the most resistance that they've encountered so far. They've encountered individuals who tried to shoot them and they're able to shoot back. So I think it's reasonable to cut them a little bit of slack for being pretty dumb here. But they are pretty dumb, and so are the Confederados, who Dolores slaughters in front of all of these other troops for reasons that I don't fully understand. She quotes this thing again, which we saw her say to the Indian right before she killed it, that not everyone is worthy to go to the promised land. And I don't, like, what's your criteria, woman? Who's worthy and who's not? Why? How are you making these decisions? Just people you don't like? Is it really just pettiness? Because I don't understand why these guys couldn't have been more used to you if you'd left more of them alive and like actually gone with the plan. I don't see how the plan would have worked any worse if you'd actually just done what you said to the general and then used these guys to fight some more. But I'm not 100% on board with Dolores anyway, so I'm just going to let her be what seems like kind of dumb here. And the wrap up to the scene for me is where this is really interesting, because we get our big explosion, right? And she takes out a lot of the Delos guys. But for me, the most powerful part of this whole arc is the ending, where she tells Teddy, hey, we got a few stragglers, go take them out back, shoot them in the head, and we'll be on our way. And Teddy starts having second thoughts. He's not cool with this betrayal either. He doesn't understand why. He doesn't think it's necessary. And to top it all off, one of these Confederados, the guy who they've been working with, looks at him in the eye and says, listen, I know what it's like to work for a tyrant. How do you feel about it? I don't feel great. We're kind of the same here, aren't we? And Teddy rejects that to a point, but also asserts his own will, which is another, like, from Dolores's perspective, this is a fascinating development, because Teddy is somebody who she can use, right? He's very useful as a gunman and as a fighter, and yet she is using him to bring some modicum of free will to the people of the Westworld, right? Or at least herself. She apparently has value. She values this free will to some level, and now Teddy's exhibiting this free will. Teddy's breaking free from her programming and saying, I'm not cool with all of this, so no, I'm not going to shoot these guys, and letting them go. And what does Dolores do with that? If you're Dolores, what bag do you put that in? Because on the one hand, it's like, yay, my sort of robot boyfriend is growing up now and becoming his own man. But on the other hand, like, you need this guy to do what you tell him to do, or you're kind of screwed. And that sort of gets into the title of the episode here, I think, the Virtue and Fortune, and the interpretation of virtue in Machiavelli's day was about not just like virtue as in high morals, but in like attributes. In other words, being good at leading. A leader with a lot of virtue would have a lot of strategy. They would be able to predict things. They would be able to plan things out ahead of time. But then there's also fortune. And fortune is just the roll of the dice. It's fate. It's stuff that you can't control. And there's always stuff you can't control. And Machiavelli and the Prince talks about this intersection of the unexpected and the intellect, and how the intellect can combat the unexpected to a point, but not completely, and prepare for things. And I think Dolores is really coming up against some of that, with Teddy going a little bit rogue, and also her dad showing up, right? That's not something that was in her plans. And the way that she's reacted to both of these things, I think shows some weakness as a leader. The fact that she is prioritizing her, I'm going to put in quotes, father here over the mission is really short-sighted, because this is just a comfort blanket for her, essentially. The idea of keeping these people around who remind her of her old life. And now Teddy is going off the reservation and doing his own thing. And if from a pure leadership perspective, you should not just let that go on. But it's Teddy, and what is she gonna do about it? Not much. As I mentioned, they do get Peter Abernathy, take him away in the vehicle. Boss Lady gets him. Bernard gets knocked out by Clementine and dragged away, possibly to the beach, but I'm not sure. I think that there's probably more for him to do still. Clementine's an interesting figure as well, because he's essentially a zombie at this point. Like, there's not a lot of cognition? Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. A lot of thinking going on in that brain, from what I can tell. She's just sort of literally like devolved to the most basic idea of a robot you can imagine. And then we get to the end. The woman, as I mentioned from the beginning, gets picked up by the Indians, and Maeve Good old Maeve. I'm glad we got more of her this episode. She runs into the samurai. Obviously, she's not going to die because in the coming up this season on Westworld, we saw her in Samurai World, and she was sporting that samurai blade and looking all boss with one of them, like Japanese garments, I guess a kimono or something. So we know where she's going. It'll be interesting to see how this interaction with this samurai plays out. And I'm very interested in the fact that the parks are starting to bleed into each other. That the edges of the parks are no longer solid walls, but that it's not just the one tiger chasing the woman. There's going to be a lot more osmosis. And as we go forward, further into Westworld Season 2, and if there's a Season 3, I assume a lot of this in Season 3 will be all of the parks kind of just mushed together. So we're going to get Westworld with elephants, right? Cowboys riding elephants? Are you kidding me? And then, like, fighting samurai at some point? You know that's got to happen. It's got to happen. I'm still holding out for dinosaurs, too. I have not given up on that. There's 6 parks. We've only seen 3 now. All right, we know 3. There's still room for dinosaurs and their robots. And then the cowboys ride the dinosaurs and the samurais. It's just, oh, okay. And then, of course, obviously, existential questions about free will and stuff. Yeah, but mostly dinosaurs. That's what I'm excited for. This episode of Westworld I was really exciting for me. I felt like there was a lot of meat to dig into especially in the Dolores arc, and seeing what her limits are and really exploring where her character has gone and yet how she has not evolved as far as I assume that she maybe had. That's fun. And then there's a lot of other plot tokens being moved around with the information and Bernard, and really interesting new concepts. This is just a huge episode, honestly. I mean, there's a lot there that's just going on all the different levels, and I am digging it to death. It has me pumped for more. I hope you guys are on the same train with me, going into whichever world that you are most excited about. And if it's not the dinosaur world, it's the wrong train, because it's not the dinosaur train. A dinosaur train. All the parents of 3-year-olds will get that reference. Thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. Don't forget, we value your comments greatly on the YouTube. If you have things that you want to posit as alternate theories, or you think that I was wrong about something, or you just want to say hi, I'll say hi back. All that stuff is great. We love you. I love you. I don't know why I'm talking about we, because it's just me here. But I appreciate y'all watching, and I'll see you guys next week with another episode of the Westworld Recap. Take care, y'all.